Chapter 5 1. Welcome to America. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? On the shore, dimly seen through the mists of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes, what is that which the breeze, o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected now shines in the stream. 'Tis the star-spangled banner. How long may it wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? And where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country, should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh! Thus be it ever, when freemen shall stand between their loved home and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace. May the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just. And this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Welcome to America. The mountainous placard on the dock read as the four children, alongside Dr. Gray, finally arrived at their destination. The destination was New York, albeit it was hardly the final one. The dock itself was not a particularly remarkable display of construction and showed signs of deterioration as it had a history of combating the elements. The family members were the last to exit the monumental steel vessel, the privilege of being stowaways, seemingly. Once their unexceptional exodus was complete, only the four members moved forward while one opted to stay behind. Vi was the laggard on this occasion, however. The reason behind his dally was most certainly cogent. The three children and Dr. Gray were now found standing near the previously mentioned placard, contemplating their next series of moves. "What now?" asked Dykes, while taking in the new scenery with her vision directed towards the immediate exhibit of the city rather than those whom she referred to. First things first. XXV was the first to respond to the inquisition. We will need to acquire a mobile phone. He finished his sentiment with rapidity. XVI, I decided to aid with this newly formulated request. While standing cloaked in silence, he turned his head towards the first person he spotted with a mobile. Detecting just such a person did not take long, it should be added. I homed in on the man, who was relatively close to the group, and progressed towards him. At the time, the man was in the middle of using the mobile while standing adjacent to an electrical pole. The male was completely unaware of the encroaching XVI, and once the two were in grabbing distance of one another, XXI snagged the phone away from his grasp, grabbed him by the head and slammed his cranium against the big, wooden electrical pole. The man stood no chance against the mighty timber and was knocked out cold. The impudent artifinoid then returned to the group shortly after, with a new possession in his clasp. "There you go, XXV, said XT, and as he threw the phone to his older brother, visibly satisfied with himself. "Well done, XTharv, XXV said without any change in his voice. Shortly after this, XXV progressed to interact with the newly acquired mobile. 10 minutes on new soil, and you have already committed assault and theft, EX stated with mockery within her voice, yet no aspersion. Right, did that turn you on? With that, XVI machine-gunned quite the unanticipated response with a grin accompanying it, while once again looking just as satisfied as moments prior. I am your sister, X. Nyx matched her brother's response time, minus the grin and self-approbation. That was a yes or no question there, sis, Thea said whilst smiling. So, you wet now? A wayward creation was unrelenting in his scrutiny, digging at his sister's sexual aberration. Moving on, XVI. Ix continued, while redirecting the conversation with a much more frigid tone having been evoked. Is he dead? She inquired of her sibling shortly after. He will be all right. XVI answered instantly in dismissal. He will just wake up with a headache. Nothing serious. The Artifinoid concluded with the smugness no longer present and having begun a search for a fag. With a headache and no mobile, I spoke in an instructive tone, unwilling to quite let go of the misdeed that had recently occurred. He will get over it. Ninth X-Spine spoke while lighting a cigarette after locating it as frustration began to elevate. Where is VI at anyway? Xi's turn it was now with the questions. He is still saying his goodbyes to the elderly couple from the cruise. Ix answered her brother, while retaining the edifying tone. Well, he better not bring those 2 bags of bones into our operation. X and I articulated right after taking a significant drag of the cigarette. I am not about to offer no retirement. Packages, he resumed, speaking in complete jest despite not displaying it facially. That was a double negative, brother, said Ix while ignoring the previously mentioned witticism. It's erroneous to say it that way. It's supposed to be, I am not about to offer any retirement packages, concluded with content in her tone present. XXV, after taking a considerable reprieve, spoke once more. Just XXV by himself isn't enough, clearly. We need one more teacher. The creation said while sounding annoyed and dismissive yet again. Can I just take this ship back to Europe, actually? Xtheon now spoke with annoyance alleviated, and Sally having now replaced it. The female Artifinoid opted to remain silent, and instead just simply smirked at her older brother's remark. The trip from England to New York took an entire week, and was more eventful for some rather than others. Whilst on the ship, 3 out of the 5 members of the family stayed hidden from the rest of the personnel, and the cruise-goers, however, 2 of the members chose another route. Could one perhaps guess who those 2 were? Yes, they were in fact X, I, and Phi. XVI, I would often leave the refuge of the depths of the liner in hopes of finding smokes and liquor, and he would usually succeed in this endeavour by breaking into the kitchen at night times. However, VI took matters to a whole new level. As you see, VI would spend most of his time with the cruise-goers themselves, on the ship's top levels, while fitting in surprisingly well, to say the least. In fact, just a few hours in, Vi had met and befriended an elderly couple. The couple was from America originally and were making their return from their visit to London via ship. VI had initially helped the seniors get situated inside their cabin as the 2 were rather frail as a result of their age. He would help them with their luggage alongside any other physical assistance the pair required. Because of just this, Vi had become quite close with the elderly couple and shadowed them throughout the whole trip, and the duo of old-timers could not be happier with this development. This trio was found standing a distance away from the family and the welcoming placard. "Well, son, the old lady and I don't quite know how to thank you for your time and your assistance," said the old man with a raspy baritone and a sincere, heartwarming tone within just those words. "Though I must say, I am still quite not over the fact that you are able to carry all that luggage by yourself. It took 3 different cruise attendants to bring it on board." The senior then finished with confusion while retaining the warm tone. At the time of the exchange between the 3, Vi was effortlessly holding 4 fully filled luggage bags with just one hand, one case balancing on top of another, stacked. "Oh, this is nothing, Frank," Vi responded lovingly with a blinding smile across his face while not even glancing at the subjects of discussion. "That's £200 you are holding up right now, dear," said the elderly woman now, who was just as amazed by the young man's physical prowess as her caring husband. "At any rate, take care of yourself now, young man. Health is all we have at the end of the day, you know. Money and the rest come and go, but health—" The woman had suddenly stopped the instruction. "Well, health weighs more than gold, sweetie." The elderly woman finished her words, while fully ardent with a deep sense of care injected into each phrase. "Sure thing, Olivia." Vi was terse with his response, but an overtone of kindness rested deep within that sentiment regardless. "That's right, Lucas. Listen to the woman. She knows what she is saying. That's why I married her in the first place." Frank spoke while showing respect and affection towards his lady. "Anyway, son, don't hesitate to contact us when you are on this coast of the country. Again, you have our information. You know, don't be a stranger, as they say." Frank concluded, no longer bothered by the previous display of vice power.
"Yes, Lucas. And write to us from time to time.
You know, just to let us know everything is okay and whatnot." The woman finished while producing a kindling smile while fixated on the young artifinoid. "Our cab is pulling up now," Frank stated while scrutinizing the cab. "We better go, Olivia," the man commanded his wife with seriousness. "Take care of yourself, Lucas," the old lady said once the two started to make their way towards the cab. This departure left Lucas encased in a blanket of quietness, which was stitched together with the fabric of sadness. However, Lucas did wave goodbye to the old couple as he watched them board the taxi, drowning in the sea of sorrow with no life preserver in sight. After this was over, the downcast one reunited with the rest of his family. As he neared the group, the look of desolation that governed Vi at that very moment could not be ignored. IX noticed this immediately and attempted to remedy the situation. "You okay, cutie pie?" X stated while overflowing with compassion towards her giant of a brother. "I will be all right," said Lucas with his head down and voice compromised by despair. IX then proceeded to rub her brother's shoulder in an effort to bring some solace to the big man. While doing just that, she started to speak once again. "Maybe we should go to a local restaurant?" the artifinoid said with an uplifting smile while glancing over at Lucas. "This is New York after all. They have so many good places to eat here." As X was finished with her suggestion, Lucas began to form a smile of his own as a result of what he had just recently heard. "Can we?" Lucas inquired while becoming gradually more enlivened by the aforementioned suggestion of his sister. "We could use some more time to formulate a plan going forward," XXV stated with his eyes still glued to the phone screen. "And a restaurant is as good of a place as any to discuss matters further." He concluded with his head now lifted as he was finally liberated from the mobile's incantation at last. Xoans did not vocalize and instead just nodded, a rare occasion on which the insolent creation had nothing to contribute. Grey had no confutation to offer to the recently suggested plan either. The group had started to move once more. New York was certainly not the final destination for the family as previously mentioned, however. It was one that the members chose to inhabit a little longer than initially intended. As the Artifinoids and the Doctor were all new arrivals, some acclimation time was very much necessary. The English language was never going to be an issue for any of the members as they all spoke it, alongside some other languages, of course. However, with the language not being a barrier, the American Western climate and culture were of quite the contrast to the Eastern European life that the family had gotten so used to. Adaptation was something that all of the Artifinoids excelled at. All that was needed was simply some time. One should add, however, that some members of the family fared much better at this task than others. In order to progress forward, the family had rented a car. XXV had hotwired one in truth, and whilst inside just that car, and in motion, Lucas was amazed by what he saw. The height of buildings, the bombardment of advertising, the constant and unrelenting commotion, the hectic pace that so many locals presided under were all elements that astounded the young man. He was impressed with the location the most out of all of the children, and by far as well. This astonishment transmuted into sheer exhilaration, however, once the car stopped in front of a rather fancy restaurant. This was an Italian-Greek eatery with dim lighting and classy music to escort it along. The room was vast and had a distinct style of older European architecture, which made V and the rest of his family feel right at home. Once the five made it inside, they were quickly seated in a booth of utmost comfort and seclusion, as was very much requested by XXV. Barely any time elapsed, and the waiter was near and ready to take the orders. "Are you all ready, or will you need some more time?" The waiter spoke in a professional and courteous tone, having approached the fairly private table. said Lucas, while in deep contemplation, with the resulted respite being the product of just that. "I think I need to start light here. Let's do the appetizer," Lucas stated while tearing his gaze away from the menu to look at the waiter for the first time. "Which one, sir?" The waiter inquired of Lucas with the same cordial and professional tone from before. "No, I mean the appetizer menu." Vi responded instantaneously with satisfaction. "The whole thing?" The waiter struggled to comprehend the request at first as he asked for clarification. "Yeah, I want to start out slowly here, so that I can save some room for the dinner and dessert," Vi concluded with a cosmic smile and a tone of great excitement infecting his words. "Very well," the waiter responded while still buried under a layer of skepticism. "What about you, miss?" The waiter now turned his attention towards Inks. "I am okay, thank you. I can always get some food from my brother's order if needed." Ix responded instantly and softly. "I will just have a water," said XXV, matching the professional tone of the waiter, whilst once again relinquishing his attention to the mobile. "Nothing for me. Thank you." Dr. Gray's turn it was now to answer.
"And what about you, sir?"
The waiter now directed his vision towards X the Second, who was the last one unattended. "No food for me," Xant responded in a neutral tone, but he was hardly finished. "I ate recently, about a month ago or so." He then added, however, the waiter found himself only more perplexed as a product of this exchange. "How is your liquor situation?" Xia produced an inquiry of his own which precluded the waiter from leaving the booth. "We have a large selection of wine, both red and white." The waiter was interrupted by X the Seconds before he had a chance to finish. "Bring a couple of bottles of each. Actually, we might be here for a while. Bring a dozen bottles of the strongest shit you got." X then finished his order in a much more stern and commanding tone. "Certainly, sir." The server responded before leaving to fulfill the unusual request. Once he left the vicinity of the booth, VI started speaking. "Thanks for this, guys." The Artifinoid spoke with genuineness. "I haven't been this sad since they cancelled that Britney Spears concert back in Slovenia." "Oh no, I made myself sad again." V finished, and he wasn't being deceitful. His face visibly saddened. Yix didn't respond to her brother choosing to comfort him once again through touch. Alexandra started to compassionately rub the shoulder of the giant once more while smiling. "You can see the bitch in concert here," said Extheant, while lighting a cigarette inside the establishment where smoking is prohibited. "That's very rude, Exthe." Dr. Gray now joined the conversation, and very uncalled for, I should add. The expression of disapproval on Gray's face was undeniable once he finished his remark. This was not entirely unsurprising, considering the doctor's interesting perspective when it came to women. "Report me to the authorities, Gray." Exthecond responded dismissively with a now fully lit cigarette. After some time spent indulged in nonsensical chatter, the family members discussed more pertinent issues, at the forefront of which was the re-establishment of the artificial creation program. With Dr. Sokolov no longer present amongst the living, the continuation of the prior mentioned fell entirely on Dr. Gray's shoulders. While still alive, Alexander Sokolov and his trusted partner Marcus Gray drew out the foundation to what would eventually be referred to as the genetic revolution. This would be the next leap forward for the species, much like the Industrial Revolution and the Computer Age Revolution served as prior. However, the execution of such an ambitious effort would require more than just funds. It would require a certain level of control and authority. Exactly this was discussed among the remainder of the family inside that restaurant. One idea after another would bounce around that table, and no family member would be left out from this discourse, as it concerned them all greatly. Finally, after an extensive conversation, a resolution was produced. A division of labour was proposed as certain desires of certain family members clashed with one another. You see, Extheant was the de facto leader of the group, for a very simple reason. Mikkolo, though not completely unchained from his programming, was capable of resisting his genetic parameter more so than the rest of his siblings, and considering the man's personality and just how stubborn the young Artifinoid was, the task of defying his vision was one entirely too difficult. XVII's vision entailed control, nevertheless. However, that control would present itself in the form of the streets. Xesain intended to become the king of the streets, if you will, while replacing all who stood in his way. Of course, the word replacing is used liberally here, as Mikkolo's methods resembled an extermination much more closely. Seon vowed to topple any gang, any cartel, any mob, or any other criminal syndicate in order to achieve his own personal vision of control. Lacking in ambition, the Artifinoid most certainly was, however. Lacking in brutality, he most certainly was not. A sadist of the highest order, Exthesandum promised that he would unleash a plague on the streets of America like no other. Whilst Mikkolo's efforts would now take priority, the artificial creation program would not, and more importantly, could not be forgotten. This task was left to Dr. Gray entirely, for the time being at least. This was the ultimate conclusion of the protracted conversation that took place inside that fancy restaurant. "Do you think they will get mad if I order the whole menu to go?" Vi asked, resembling an excited child in tone. "I will get mad if you do that." Ix responded instantly to her bigger sibling. "We are not doing that." 6, Alexandra responded with vigour and swiftness yet again. "I am not spending any more time in this FUC. In this restaurant, 6th, the bell added while her voice escalated in the midst of the statement. The little and beautiful Artifinoid had the right to be this assertive as the family spent nearly 6 hours inside the establishment. With no more topics in need of being discussed, the 4 children and Gray had finally made their exit. Once the quintet escaped the confines of the restaurant, a short exchange broke out while outside. The drive from New York to California is about 2 days long, stated XXV in his typical monotone. "Dr. Gray, will you be requiring rest before we proceed with our travels?" Anders inquired while turning his head towards the little doctor. "Oh, yeah. I am the only human here, huh?" the doctor muttered to himself. "I often forget that." Gray now spoke at higher volumes while sounding defeated. "No, I will be okay. As long as I can sleep in the car, I will be fine." Gray concluded. "How about that?" said X the Aunt while chuckling. "Want to sit in the back right next to IX, Doctor?" X the continued with a hint of derision present. "First, I don't think that's a good idea, Xdainth," the doctor said, struggling and even averting his eyes. "You can engineer artificial human beings, Doc. How about engineering some confidence for yourself, Mikolo formulated, with slight and condescending laughter accompanying his words while patting the doctor on the back. Doctor and the 4 children proceeded to enter the car and began their lengthy trip. State line after state line crossed, and crime after crime committed. Would one like to venture a guess of the responsible party? Admittedly, most of the crimes that were perpetrated weren't anything special. Nothing special when contrasted to the standards of the family at least. Most of the misdemeanors were theft of liquor, theft of cigarettes, theft of prescription drugs, theft of illegal drugs, and theft all around, really. But yes, as some are wondering, undoubtedly, certain individuals had met their rather unfortunate and tragic end whilst the children were making their way across the country to the City of Angels. Some of those above-mentioned individuals were to be found at a small town near the Iowa-Nebraska state line. "Why did you kill this one, X the?" Ix had inquired of her anger-driven brother once she had entered the little pharmaceutical establishment after hearing dissonant commotion coming from within. "Did he not have the drugs you wanted?" Ix added shortly after witnessing the corpse of a pharmacy technician inhabiting the floor. "No," Sig instantly responded while surprising his sister with his answer. "I killed the one in the back because they didn't have what I wanted." Mikolo had taken a slight moment to himself in order to light up a cigarette. "This one I killed, I don't remember why." X's voice had resembled his older brother's on this occasion, as it had not fluctuated even once when answering his younger sister. "What was it exactly that you were looking for, brother?" Suddenly XXV had entered the confines of the store, and with it, the conversation. EX had moved towards the back to survey the body located there, as was mentioned by X-Side-Eye prior. "Meth." Another instantaneous reply. This was out of the Artifinoid. Methamphetamine hydrochloride tablets are seldom found in these kinds of establishments, XII. XXV instructively explained to his younger brother while moving towards the body in order to examine it more closely. "At any rate, amphetamines are more commonly used to treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder than its counterpart of disoxin." XXV finished expounding as he stepped over the body occupying the floor with his vision locked on it, carefully scanning it. "I asked him about those too," XZ said in a surprisingly collected tone while smoking inside the locale. "But he said they were out of those. so I told him he better find some, or else he would be out of his life. He explained the situation away to his older brother while remaining in a state of poise. He said he can't help me and threatened to call the cops or whatever, so I had to do what I had to do, you know. The creation finished while lighting up yet another cigarette, having not even finished the one prior. With now 2 cigarettes in his mouth, the murderous artifinoid stated, "It's no big deal." IX had made her return from the storage area of the pharmacy whilst the 2 brothers discussed the incident. "It's a clean neck break," X stated in grand relief. "Minor. Signs of struggle to cover up, but no blood or other fluids to clean," the little artifinoid expressed with a smile present as she was genuinely pleased by what she had most recently mentioned. "Minor skull and facial fragmentations on this one." XXV spoke, crouched as he examined the corpse. "However, the cause of death is cervical fracture, much like the one in the storage area." Anders had raised back upright while continuing to speak in a composed tone. "Luckily for us, there are no cameras utilized in this construction. However, we must hurry and dispose of the corpses while covering up all of the signs of struggle, be it minor or not." XXV articulated while gazing at his sister, implying the commencement of the recently mentioned. "IX, pull up the car as close as you can to the main entrance. My brother and I will grab a body each and load it into the trunk." Anders shifted his vision onto his brother and away from his sister, who had begun to motion outside and into the vehicle. "Once the bodies are moved, we will take care of whatever evidence was left as a result of the interactions between yourself and the technicians." XXV had concluded with his elaboration, while XDiad offered no rebuttal and had begun the freshly discussed process with the 2 burning sticks in his mouth still. The plan eventuated as intended. The bodies were relocated, the minor traces of evidence were removed, and the shop was left at once, with a "Sorry, we are closed" sign plastered across the main entrance for good measures. The family had resumed their travels, and while more stops had to be made, none took as long as the one prior mentioned, and none more necessitated the act of concealment, as the following transgressions committed did not end in the morbid deed of homicide. All travels eventually meet their finale, and of course this specific excursion, albeit hardly a typical one, was no exception. The family had reached the sunny and divergent state of California, and once the members did finally arrive at their ultimate destination, the city of Los Angeles, more matters had to be discussed and handled accordingly. One of these more pressing issues was the acquisition of a house, which would require within it a large enough space to accommodate for any artificial creation-related research, and would need to be concealed enough to avoid any unnecessary attention. This, much like many other details, was left to XXV to handle. The funds for the purchasing of the appropriate domicile was not an issue, as Dr. Sokolov had passed down his wealth in its entirety to Gray and the children. The location and accession of such a territory, however, was an entirely different story. Nevertheless, before such an endeavour could commence, the new arrivals required fresh identities. This matter was also foreseen by the late Alexander, as he had made an arrangement while still back in the old country with one of his connections across the pond. In a timely manner, the 4 children had been given official, human identification while utilizing the names assigned to them during their stay at the Slovenian facility. XXV was allotted the title of Anders Greylove. XVI, I was given the human moniker of Mikolo Greylove, while X was designated with the name of Alexandra Greylove, and of course the young V was named Lucas Greylove. Once all proceedings regarding human integration were completed, XXV or Anders even, had begun the process of finding just the right domicile for the family to inhabit. Chapter 5, 2. Monica Simmons. Modern architecture at its finest was on display right in front of XXV's eyes, as it stood there in all of its glory. This was a 7,000-square-foot mansion with 10 bedrooms and just as many bathrooms, with multiple kitchens, a full garage, a full basement, and a full attic. But perhaps one is getting too ahead of himself, as we should, of course, start at the basics. This mansion was located on the outskirts of the magnificent city that is LA, though opinions certainly differ when it comes to the City of Angels. Despite the mansion fit the criteria of secrecy to perfection, as it was surrounded by forestry with a prolonged driveway that led to the main gate. Once through the gate, one would spot an impressive parking lot with an even more impressive garage garnishing it. Just slight of that, of course, was the entrance to this bastion of beauty, which continued once through the main door. A living room was the first location one would spot upon entering, and it was a sight to behold. Large enough to play certain sports, this locale would accommodate for many of the endeavours that the family required to involve themselves in. The kitchen was not too far from there, and the utilities within this site were stirring to say the least. Equipped with the latest and greatest, the kitchen would most certainly serve as quite the heaven for a certain young, tall blonde who resembled a kitchen appliance himself in stature. A refrigerator, for those who aren't quite catching on. Many miscellaneous rooms would be passed on one's way. Through this spectacular construction up until one would get to the stairs, leading to the second and third floors. The stairs were in fact in multiple locations, and most resembled a spiral in assembly. However, a lift was also installed within the mansion as well for any and all unable to use the steps. Corridors filled with paintings, vases, and many other expressions would lead to many of the magnificent rooms that were on the second floor of this construction. Quite the amount of those same chambers was not, and never would be utilized, however. Windows commonly accompanied the corridors and halls on the mansion and were shaded for privacy. The third floor was uninhabited altogether and contained the minimal amount of furniture. The attic, on the other hand, contained not much of anything at all. This development was very satisfactory to XXV, as the unconsumed space would serve ideally for training, planning, and other activities within that same vein. The mansion was exactly what was needed for the family. XXV did not hesitate to pull the trigger on the purchase. "She is all yours," stated the realtor while walking away from XXV to get back into his car, as the two had found themselves in the final stages of the acquisition of the mansion. XXV opted to remain under the shroud of silence while he stared down the impressive construct in front of him once more. However, this optical examination was not in awe of the building, while the artifinoid most surely found the mansion a stately piece of architecture. There was something else that was now bothering the young mastermind. You see, XXV possessed quite the unprecedented and unmatched ability of sense. Whilst the realtor and the creation were ending their very final walkthrough of the palace, Anders had sensed something, or rather someone to be more specific, inside the mansion. Needless to say, this was not a part of the deal. XXV progressed to enter the mansion once again to unearth this uninvited guest. The search, unsurprisingly, did not take very long. In the basement of this architectural wonder was found an intruder. "I think it would be best if you come out now," XXV instructed with a tone of considerable austerity after a time spent scanning the basement area. Silence was the one to provide the artificial humanoid with an answer, however. "I am aware of your exact location. He then sternly added, unaffected by the previously failed attempt of producing a response. "You are inside of a locker with the number 3 on it." Anders concluded his address. Shortly after this remark, a locker door could be heard opening as a screeching, irksome resonance had suddenly pierced the stillness at once. "This is not what you think," said the intruder in a fluctuating female voice immediately after the locker door revealed her presence. The intruder was in fact a woman, something that should surprise most. "Are you aware of what I am thinking, miss?" XXV inquired with genuine interest and a spice of acerbity. "Well?" The woman required a reprieve before continuing, as she found herself in a rather disadvantaged position. "You probably think I am a squatter, or am here to steal." The woman found the doorsom needed to produce a response, but was quickly interrupted by Anders in the midst of her opening. "Or that you are a journalist, Miss Simmons," XXV stated with a perforating gaze locked on the intruder, "though I do not claim to know the reason behind your presence fully." He finished his interruption with the sternness in his voice now lessening. "Wait!" Deeply confused was certainly an appropriate manner which described the state that the young journalist now became enchanted by. "How do you know that?" she asked while filled with intrigue, foregoing her previous attempt of explanation altogether. "You left your work badge inside of your car, Miss Simmons," Anders Greylove stated with truthfulness as he returned to his most typical tone. "I took the time to view it over." "You entered my car without my permission?" Simmons asked, while completely flabbergasted with her voice elevating. "You entered my house without my permission, Miss Simmons." XXV's retort was once again filled with rigour. "I am afraid they cancel one another out." The man now required a slight reprieve himself. "Besides, Miss Simmons, your car was left parked on private property. The property of this very mansion, in fact." Another respite by Anders. This was as he finished the sentiment with confidence. However, before long, he resumed his interrogation. "Now, if you would be so kind as to tell me how you managed to get inside." The artifinoid instructed the woman. "I gave the guard $50. The lady answered in a near instant while choosing to avert her gaze from the man she was occupying the basement with. $50? Really now? Is that all it took?" XXV produced a torrent of questions while already fully aware of the woman's deceit. "Well," the woman hesitated momentarily. "I also told him that I would do something interesting with him, but let the record show that I never intended to do that." "I am not that kind of woman, mister." The young female was now speaking with the veil of deceit lifted as her voice vacillated throughout the sentiment. It was her full intent to continue. But before she could do just that, XXV interceded once again. "Right, you are just the kind of woman that enters other people's property unbidden," Greylove articulated, though not with as much reprimand present as one would think. In fact, Anders seemingly was no longer bothered by this unforeseen invasion. First, the woman once again found herself struggling to generate a retort, nearly crumbling under the weight of uncertainty. "Miss Simmons, perhaps it would be best if you stepped out of the locker." XXV resumed speaking with no negativity to be observed amidst his words. "Right," the woman stated after realizing that she was inside the locker for much longer than was necessary. She then proceeded to egress the aforementioned metallic container, however, while perhaps under some pressure, the young and beautiful lady tripped on the bottom section of the locker. XXV was not too far from where the journalist was as this unfortunate accident occurred and manoeuvred himself to catch her at rather unprecedented speeds before she could complete her dive. The graceful creation had propped the woman up amidst her inevitable plummet. This would not go unnoticed by the beauty. "That's some reaction time you got there, mister." The woman fished for an answer. "Anders Greylove, Miss Simmons. My name is Anders Greylove," XXV stated while taking his arm off the young lady as she no longer required the support. "Now, if you could please continue on with your explanation, miss," Anders Greylove concluded whilst walking away from the woman. "Well," the young woman resumed, having finally escaped the confines of the locker, "I am a journalist, as you have said, and I am here to collect information about the man who lived here before you, Mr. Greylove." The young reporter finished her response with a considerable amount of confidence present. The realtor did not mention of any noteworthy past inhabitants, though I did sense he was omitting something, XXV stated while staring at the woman with some distance between the two. "Realtors, am I right?" Monica spoke while trying to ease the tension, which was in fact minimal at this point, to be fair. Anyway, the man who used to live here was a big-time film director who eventually went on to make extreme hardcore pornography and even snuff films. The woman spoke while sounding revitalized, positioning herself closer to XXV step by step. "I was trying to find some evidence for the piece I am writing on him. I was one of the first ones to uncover this story, you know," the woman concluded braggadociously. "That's quite impressive, I must say." Anders now spoke while once again relocating himself within the basement. "Judging by your skin complexion, the intonation of your voice, and other physical aspects, you could not be older than 25. XXV stated with his typical instructive tone as he faced away from the lady and towards the basement windows. "Have you been staring at my other physical aspects for long, Mr. Greylove?" The young lady spoke in a newly surfaced, skittish tone. The artiphenoid, while fully understanding the undertone of the woman's most recent sentiment, opted to continue down the path of his initial inquiry. Before doing just that, however, XXV did smirk at the young lady's comment. "That's quite a big exposé for someone your age, Miss Simmons," he concluded, sounding sincerely impressed while overlooking the previous remark in its entirety, having now turned himself around to face Monica once more. "Yes, I am 21 years old," the woman spoke while finding herself drowning in bemusement. "I must say I am impressed with your deductive ability, Mr. Greylove. Are you a journalist yourself by any chance?" Monica inquired with perplexity beside her still. "Not quite, Miss Simmons," XXV responded rapidly. "I think it would be best if we leave the parameters of this here basement, don't you think?" the creation inquired invitingly. Quite unexpected, this was coming out of the young Anders. The two newly introduced went on to do exactly as proposed as they made their way upstairs to the living room and kitchen area of the mansion. Once there, the conversation continued. "Have you found anything?" the man suddenly inquired of the woman once the kitchen was reached. "Anything for my piece, you mean?" Monica asked rhetorically. "No, unfortunately not. I think everything was removed once the allegations against him were proven to be true and he went off to prison. I was just hoping that maybe they missed or overlooked something."
Monica Simmons finished while visibly despondent.
"I commend you for the effort, Miss Simmons," XXV stated while the woman was taking a seat inside the kitchen. Greylove was sincerely impressed with the conviction entombed inside the young journalist. "So, are we cool about the whole house invasion thing, then?" The young lady posed a question while commanded by anxiety. "No harm was done, Miss Simmons. I don't see any reasons to exacerbate the matter." The artiphenoid's response carried a dose of serenity to help ease the ambitious woman's current state. Seemingly, the desired effect was achieved as Monica's face began to swiftly change, with the tension now beginning to abandon her. "Thank you," said Monica, now sounding completely relieved. "I should be going now," she stated while reaching for her bag while rising from her seat. "You are going to leave without even finding what you came here for, miss?" Anders genuinely posited an inquest, with the pitch of the young Artifinoid's voice surging to higher tones as surprise perforated it. "And here I was singing your praises not even that long ago." XXV's words carried a hint of playfulness and charm even. This was certainly most unusual. Furthermore, a slight smile followed his remark. "Well, being caught red-handed while in someone else's house can kind of put a damper on that, Mr. Greylove," Monica answered while reciprocating the playful tone and a grin of her own to escort it. "That, and I have no idea where to look anymore. I have searched all I could." Monica once again sounded defeated. "Even the attic, Miss Simmons?" XXV followed up with haste. "No, I didn't make it that far," she answered honestly, while slightly confused. "What's in the attic, Mr. Greylove?" she went on, fully engulfed by intrigue. Anders provided no response and instead chose to simply smile at the young lady. Shortly after this display, the two found themselves in motion once more, as they were now making their way towards the attic. Once the destination was reached, XXV initiated a new discourse. "Behind that wall there is a room," he stated, directing the reporter's vision towards the exact location he was alluding to. "I sensed it earlier in the walkthrough. This was the oversight you had hoped for, Miss Simmons." XXV concluded in the most composed of all tones, with his eyes glued to the barrier. "Are you sure? How do you know?" Monica asked, struggling to believe this implausible claim in its totality. "Yes, Miss Simmons, I am sure. And as far as your second question is concerned," XXV said as he began to near the mysterious wall, "I've looked at blueprints for just such mansion constructs, and in all of the drafts there was a room where this wall is. This wall was built to keep something obscured, as it is not a part of the original design." Anders stated this with the distance between himself and the wall completely closed, having now begun the process of heavy inspection of the fortification. "It is well done, however. I can see how this could have been missed." XXV was now done with his explanation, with his eyes still diligently scanning the partition. "So, you are an engineer, then?" Simmons inquired with a level of distrust still present, while starting to near the wall herself as well. "Yes, you could certainly say that, Miss Simmons." XXV finished as the gap between the two was gradually shrinking. "But are you a demolitionist as well there, Mr. Greylove?" The cheeky woman doubled down with the questions. "Because I am going to need to have this here wall removed." She wasn't quite finished yet, however. "Before you say it, Mr. Greylove, as I see it on your face, yes, I am in fact an intruder who is now demanding you to perform construction work inside of the house I illegally entered. The situation is as ridiculous as it seems, but you must help me get inside that room, Mr. Greylove." The woman was now finished with her verbose exposition, while a great sense of urgency chaperoned her sentiment. Anders smiled at the woman, which is not the most common occurrence, one should add, and then progressed to respond. "Miss Simmons, I would love to know what's inside that room just as much as you," he stated as he continued to scrutinize the obstacle placed in front of him. This new hurdle was not an easy one to jump over. This wall was made out of brick and was by no means thin. Had I been in XXV's shoes, the young Artifinoid would just bash through it without too many issues. The wall was formidable, certainly, but not formidable enough to withstand VI's might. Had the position in aforementioned shoes been occupied by the middle brother of the family, Exter Second, he would do well to play wrecking ball with the wall, using himself as the ball. You see, while XVI might not have possessed the raw strength needed to overcome this foe, the momentum of his body hitting the wall, alongside numerous attempts, would eventually provide enough force needed to break down this barrier. IX would have, of course, just simply called over her brother for 6, since the two were effectively inseparable. Unfortunately, XXV did not find himself in the position of being able to mimic his 2 younger brothers, or even his sister for that matter. However, before long, the inventive Artifinoid was able to formulate a plan. Using the household chemicals which he had found around the mansion, alongside other materials, Anders made 5 patches of what most closely resembled explosives. He then proceeded to stick those 5 patches to different parts of the wall, with space between them being calculated to perfection. After this was done, Greylove pierced each patch with a metal wire, with all 5 wires connected to a battery-run device. This device would, of course, produce the initial burst of energy needed to transfer the heat to the rest of the patches. Once the setup was complete, XXV looked at the woman, who remained next to him throughout their entire adventure, and began to speak. "You may want to leave the immediate premises now, Miss Simmons."
The man spoke, bearing a great warning.
"This will most certainly get loud." Anders finished his sentiment. Monica followed his instructions, as she was most surely not fond of loud explosions. Once Monica cleared the distance necessary in order to avoid being affected by the explosion, XXV had set off his destructive mechanism. The wall stood no chance, as all 5 explosive patches yielded the desired effect, compromising the wall's weak points. The foe, LA the brick barrier, was now trounced in its totality. Anders Greylove took the time to clear all and any rubble that was produced as a result of the explosion, and while this was occurring, Monica had made her return back to the attic. It worked,
Monica stated, greatly elated while XXV remained silent.
In front of the two now was revealed another room indeed. This was a small room designed to act as storage, and this purpose it most assuredly fulfilled, as inside were stored VHS tapes. Considering the history of the previous inhabitant of the house, one should not need many guesses to be able to ascertain exactly what was on those tapes. Acid dreams, a boy's best friend, playing with dolls were just some of the names plastered across the tapes. "Will you be viewing these tapes, Miss Simmons?" the Artifinoid inquired with sincerity, against my better judgment. Monica responded with quickness, yet a hint of interest could be discerned from the woman's words. "You should be careful in this matter." Anders returned to his regular, instructive tone. "This is considered evidence after all." XXV spoke with admonishment. "This isn't my first time, Mr. Greylove," the young lady stated with near dismissal of the most recent remark. "Don't you worry, the authorities will never find out I watched any of them." Simmons responded with a great sense of reassurance to conclude, "Have you the stomach for this kind of material, Miss Simmons?" XXV followed up with another question while remaining neutral in tone. "What choice do I have? A story is a story, and this one is a big one, and I would be damned if I let it go after being one of the first to break it." The woman was now speaking with not just confidence, but a great deal of pride as well. "Would you mind helping me load these up, Mr. Greylove?" Suddenly the woman's tone softened as she directed her inquisition towards Anders. The man smirked and then quickly responded, "Certainly." The pair began the process of relocating the tapes inside Monica's car. This process did take some time, as the distance between the two locations was quite considerable. However, once the duo was done with the task, another conversation sprouted, with both young adults located near the reporter's automobile. "Thank you for this, Mr. Greylove. said Monica in an earnest tone while closing the rear door of the vehicle shortly after finishing loading the evidence. "I did not quite expect such a response from you, especially considering the circumstances we met under," she finished while genuinely surprised by what had transpired on this day. "You can call me Anders, Miss Simmons," XXV responded without much time elapsed. "Yes, and you can do the same," Monica reciprocated with swiftness of her own and a tender grin alongside it. "Very well, Anders," said Anders, poking fun at the young lady. Greylove was acting in a manner which was hardly customary when contrasted to his usual behaviour. If only any of his siblings were around to witness this metamorphosis. Despite, Monica Simmons could not help but laugh at his comment. "That's very amusing, Anders." Monica spoke intently. "I am wondering if I could ask you to notify me in the case of more evidence surfacing," the woman said while once again softening her voice as she made the request. "Certainly, Monica," Anders responded while the woman was pulling out a card with her number on it. "There it is, Mr. Anders," Monica stated immediately after she located the card, and whilst in the process of handing it over, she resumed the exchange. "Call me if you find anything else of interest. Or for other reasons as well, you know," Monica concluded with a soft tone and an enticing smile. "For other reasons, Miss Simmons?" XXV inquired rhetorically, while fully understanding the implications behind the young woman's most recent remark. "Yes, for other reasons, you know." The woman simply repeated herself with rapidity. "Anyway, Mr. Anders, I really should be going now. These tapes aren't going to watch themselves now, unfortunately. So, I should go home and get my bath bag ready to go," she finished while smiling once again as her mood was uplifted quite so. Shortly after, Monica Simmons got inside the car and turned the engine on, driving off and leaving the premises of the mansion altogether. The duo had now parted ways. After this unforeseen meeting had met its end, the next order of business was for Anders to notify the rest of the family of the newly purchased location, and just that he did. A mere hour had passed, and the remaining members started to make their arrival. "Fine work." XXV Grey was the first to remark on the property. "This is definitely spacious enough for any creation-related work." Grey finished with a physiognomy of great satisfaction. "What about food-related work, you know?" Vi's turn it was now to speak seemingly, with his inquest broiled with the spice of immense interest. "How is the kitchen, brother?" he concluded with great anticipation in his voice. "I believe you will find the kitchen matching your desires fully." 6. XXV produced a response without even glancing at his brother while still gazing at the construction in front of him. "And all the training and planning we will be doing?" Ix now inquired of Bald Artifinoid as she was next in line, effectively. "Yes, this building will accommodate those efforts with ease," XXV answered with his vision affixed to the property still. "And yes, XVII, it will accommodate for your hobbies as well," he then added, fully anticipating the next inquiry. "I wasn't even going to ask,"
They stated in a disconnected tone while in the middle of lighting a cigarette.
The next couple of hours were spent with the setup and rearrangement in order to match the needs of the family. For those who undoubtedly posited the question, yes, it was in fact Vi that performed most, if not all of the lifting, while Nix was the one directing much of the rearrangement. "I think the dresser would look better here," Ike stated with her arms crossed and eyes slightly squinted while scrutinizing certain parts of the mansion. "Does it really matter, sis?" Vi said with an overtone of vexation. "It would look better here, sweetie. It matches with the rest of the immediate scenery." Alexandra responded to her irritated brother, trying to alleviate his irritated state. You were made to be an assassin, SES, not an interior home decorator. Vi stated while still exasperated. I am sorry, sis, I am just super hungry. The giant added, and he wasn't lying. It's now been longer than 2 hours since the young artiphenoid had consumed anything. All right, put the wardrobe and the dresser down for now.
Vax conceded the effort for the time being,
fully understanding of the oppressive creature that was Vi's hunger. Lucas had placed the wardrobe he was holding in his left hand down shortly before proceeding to do the same with the dresser he was holding in his right. Let's get something to eat now, and we will finish it later. She concluded as a cosmic smile formed across her brother's face, the product of great and much desired approval. With the time elapsing, the family became more and more accustomed not only to the glorious location they resided in, but also to the American culture. And once the mansion was fully converted into what was so deeply desired by the Greylove members, Poseidon's plan of taking the streets had to make its inception. Starting up is always the hardest part as it is, and this instance was no different. The family, after all, had no real connections whilst in the United States and were not in position to take any unnecessary risks of revealing their true identities when attempting to establish them, as most of the members were, of course. Not quite belonging to the human species. However, luck had apparently become an appendage to the family, albeit a welcomed one, as Anders Greylove, while deeply indulged in research, had received an unexpected phone call. This is Anders Greylove. Whom am I speaking to? Anders stated shortly after answering the mobile. So professional, Mr. Greylove, said the woman on the other end in a playful tone. This is Monica Simmons. We met a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember? The woman inquired while retaining the lively manner. Most certainly, Miss Simmons. What is this call regarding? I do wonder. The impenetrable tower of decorum XXV was whilst talking. Well, a moment of hesitation had consumed the young and ambitious journalist. I just wanted to know if you might have found any more evidence. Simmons had pacified the hesitation, however, not fully. I'm afraid there have been no such developments, Miss Simmons. The consummate creation responded to the inquiry, despite having fully realized that it was not the intended reason behind the call. Miss, would you like to relay on to me the real reason you contacted me tonight? He produced an inquiry of his own, with it being hardly as ulterior as the woman whom he was communicating with. Yeah, it was really that obvious, wasn't it? The woman was caught red-handed by Anders yet again. Well, I really wanted to thank you again, Mr. Greylove, for helping with the evidence. The story I wrote as a result of those tapes we found had earned me a promotion of sorts. Monica's voice was overflowing with elation as she recited her most recent journalistic effort. Furthermore, Mr. Greylove, I was thinking that we could meet up, and I could help you with information since I do have quite a lot of it, you know. Gradually, Simmons unearthed her true intentions, word by word. XXV understood the situation in its entirety and had also realized the possible significance of such a meeting. Yes, I believe that would be most ideal, Miss Simmons. XXV's voice was now filled with affability while remaining professional. Where did you have in mind, Miss Simmons? The 5 Nations, Monica Simmons proclaimed in excitement once the two had arrived at the fancy restaurant. It is called that because they have the best chefs from 5 different countries working there, and they all serve their country's most prominent dishes. Monica added with deep pride while the pair began to motion towards the main door. It is fancy as all hell, and thanks to our discovery of those tapes, I can now afford to eat here. The woman's state of exuberance was her permanent residence indeed, as she had not left it even once while talking to Anders. Shall we go in then, Miss Simmons? XXV stated, having already opened the door for the young lady. "Thank you, Mr. Greylove," the woman said, smiling. "I am glad to see there is still some chivalry left out there," she appended, chuckling while Anders grinned in response as the duo entered the premises. The establishment was fancy indeed, and quite spacious as well. The front lobby was a massive construct in its own right, decorated with trinkets from all the nations involved as it split into 5 different corridors which all led to their respective areas. Flags were posted above each corridor as to distinguish between them. The 5 flags were Spanish, Italian, French, German, and Greek. "I have French roots, Anders," the woman suddenly articulated with friendly firmness once the two reached the crossroads. "So, if you don't mind, we go to France tonight," she concluded while smiling at the artifinoid. Anders remained silent and had just simply extended his arm to let the woman lead the way. Once the pair made their way to the foyer designated for French cuisine, they were quickly enveloped by the vibrations of archetypical French music while intimately soothed by dim, yet idyllic lighting. The personnel inside were all wearing dark blue pants with a white top, while on their domes was situated a bright red beret. In the centre of the lobby was observed a miniature replica of the Eiffel Tower constructed out of glass, which stood directly in the middle of a small pool filled with water and schools of vivid and energetic fish inside it. "You like the place, Mr. Greylove?" asked Monica, with her appetizer being great suspense. "Yes, it is rather impressive, this restaurant." Anders was scanning the surroundings while talking to the woman sitting directly across. "The attention to detail and the craftsmanship on display here is quite something, Miss Simmons. Thank you for an invitation to such a distinguished establishment." Anders Greylove was entirely sincere when referencing his appreciation while speaking in his typical professional tone. Shortly after XXV finished his remark, a waitress had made her appearance to take the pair's orders. The lovely young journalist had ordered a serving of beef bourguignon as an appetizer and the cocu au vin as the main course, with a glass of Chateau Lafite red wine to accompany it. The all-filled XXV, however, had selected the duck confit with no appetizer and a simple glass of water to go along, since Anders very much differed from his younger brother Extravagant when it came to alcoholic beverages. Once the waitress had all the desired information, she had left the vicinity, leaving the duo to resume their conversation. "Well, Anders," Monica said invitingly, "I have already told you plenty about myself, yet you haven't mentioned a thing about yourself," she stated while smiling at the artifinoid. "I mean, I don't even know what you do, Mr. Greylove," she added in a voice wrapped with a layer of intrigue. "I am afraid I do not currently possess enough information about yourself to reveal details of my own, Miss Simmons." The dish was purposefulness, and the sauce was mystique as XXV spoke to the woman. "A mystery it is, then," Simmons proclaimed, having sipped the wine, and with it a dose of excitement. "I like mysteries. It's one of the reasons I became a journalist, in fact." She concluded her sentiment with yet another sample of wine, following it shortly after. "What about the other reasons, Miss Simmons? Dare to share?" XXV stated while carefully observing the woman's actions. "You are going to laugh, Anders," the young lady answered, producing a chuckle herself briefly after her response. "I fell in love with the concept of journalism, you know, digging for the truth, the revelation of just such truth, and keeping those in positions of power in line, you know." The woman was drunk indeed, however. It wasn't the wine affecting the journalist, but rather the intoxicating effect of gratification. "Yes, most certainly," Anders responded, smiling at the woman with a sense of approval. "The Fourth Estate, the watchdog of the government as it is. XXV added with an educative tone yet again. "Exactly!" The woman suddenly burst out with major passion, having escalated in voice to such extent, in fact, it resulted in other patrons looking over to the pair's table. "I am sorry about that." She quickly subdued her enthusiasm. "I just feel that so many journalists go into the field for the wrong reasons and often don't have enough balls, Anders." Vehemently she spoke, while waiting for the meals.
Yes,
Balls, as you have expressed, is certainly a big component of major success in the field. XXV remained intently fixated on the woman as the two spoke. Perhaps the spice of admiration had been added to the man's meal. As a matter of fact, Miss Simmons, journalist is one of the professions that often exhibits psychopathy traits, as it has been demonstrated by DTI and fMRI scans done on certain brains, with the result being a reduced number of connections within the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. The meal had made its arrival while the duo was conversing. However, Monica's attention was reserved for XXV and his elaboration, as the woman had barely reacted to the waitress with the plates. This, of course, produces a diminished ability to feel certain emotions such as guilt, empathy, and, most pertinently, fear. It is exactly how certain journalists are capable of participating in battles alongside soldiers while remaining unarmed, or how some reveal such devastating information and are willing to take the risk of their whole life being destroyed as a result. There is, of course, an additional matter of satiation of ego, as various levels of megalomania and egotism are also commonly displayed by those with psychopathy traits. XXV had concluded his presentation while the waitress had concluded her act of placing the food on the table. "Are you calling me a psychopath, Mr. Greylove?" Simmons inquired, hardly offended yet fully enticing. "Not quite, Miss Simmons," XXV responded with the food still untouched. "You may very well exhibit some qualities of psychopathy. However, I possess a very definitive frame of reference for such a deviation, if you will, and you don't quite fit it. If one subtracts the number of hours in a typical workday from Anders Greylove's designated name, then one should realize whom the creation had referenced with his most recent remark. So, you are telling me you know a real by-the-book psychopath, Anders?" The woman was devouring major servings of fascination, yet still had not touched the food. "Most definitely, Miss Simmons." The man provided an instant response to satisfy her curiosity. "So you hang around psychopaths?" The woman gazed intently at the man in front of her, attempting to unravel the mystery. "Are you a politician, Mr. Greylove?" she suddenly inquired. XXV had chuckled at the inquest before producing his answer. "Not quite, Miss Simmons. Dare to venture another guess?" He playfully led the woman on. "Well, let's just go straight to another criminal profession, then." Simmons's merriment had matched the one previously displayed by XXV. "Are you a head of a criminal organization, Mr. Anders Greylove?" "And if so, may I write a piece on you?" the woman stated, however. One should not be too quick to infer that her remark was one made entirely out of jest. "Does that prospect excite you, Miss Simmons?" XXV opted to answer a question with a question while retaining the lure from before. Monica required a moment to contemplate. Speaking of plates, the fancy dishes have lost a significant amount of heat since their arrival to the pair's table. "Well, it certainly doesn't scare me." The journalist smiled shortly after her comment. "I know some who are involved in criminal activity." The woman took another respite to indulge herself with yet another sip of the lavish wine. "Much like yourself, Mr. Greylove," she concluded with a stern yet cordial tone, while tempting the man sitting directly across from her to finally produce the revelation. "That's quite a level of confidence backing your insinuation, Miss Simmons." Anders reciprocated with a stringent voice with no malice present, as the Artiphenoid had anticipated much of what the woman articulated. "Well, Mr. Greylove?" Monica spoke, fueled entirely by resolve. "I did some research on you after our initial meeting, since I figured you had to be a big-time player in order to afford such a luxurious mansion, but I was not able to find anything." "Nothing at all, Mr. Greylove. That was most unusual." Another moment for another sip. "So I kept digging and digging, but in the end, still nothing. Just how does one generate such wealth, yet remains completely under the radar?" Monica was about to finalize her investigative sentiment with a grand prognosis, yet her thunder would be stolen by the bald Artiphenoid sitting across the table from her, by being involved in underground criminal activity. "Was that the sentiment you meant to express?" "Miss Simmons?" XXV inquired, while knowing fully well exactly where the woman was heading with her explanation from the moment she started. "Precisely, Mr. Greylove." Satisfaction had now entered the woman's system, yet still not a single bite of food. "I realize I might be wrong, of course." Again the woman was interrupted amidst her exposition. "You aren't wrong, Miss Simmons. This admission might seem quite foolish to many. However, it is important to remember that XXV was capable of reading people better than they can themselves. With all the information gathered on the woman sitting across from him, the brilliant Artiphenoid rationalized a capacity to fully trust the journalist.